When I allow things to clutter my perception of myself or other people, it can become a problem. I can think of myself in a really negative way that's not completely accurate. I can think of other people in ways that aren't completely accurate. And I treat myself or I treat other people based on those perceptions. I think I was about 9 years old when I first got my first pair of glasses. And one of the things that I have struggled with over the years, especially as an adult, because I wasn't as responsible as maybe my parents were for me when I was a kid. But when you get a pair of glasses and you have them for a while, it's not just about the prescription changing. That's part of the problem. But sometimes, you're just rough on your glasses, and eventually there's scratches and there's things that are all over lenses and or maybe even if you just have readers, nowadays. Some of us are in that time of our lives. And you're constantly putting them on, taking them off, and man, you start getting smudges and stuff all over them. And when you finally clean those things off, doesn't it seem like it's a brand new world? Like you like all the stuff that you were seeing is still there. It's not that you weren't seeing it, but now it's more clear. I used to have an issue with my contacts because I didn't wear the daily contacts. And even when I wore the ones you're supposed to throw away after a couple weeks, I'd still wear them for, much longer than that. Because it was money. And I'm like, they're fine. I can still see out of them. And you start getting these deposits, this gunk that's building up on your contacts. And you can see it, like when you take them out of the case, put them in your eye, and you're like, oh, there's some stuff on there. Oh, well. And just throw it on my eye anyway. And that's me. Okay, you can judge me all you want to. That's what I would do. Excuse me. But whenever I got a new pair of contacts, after having spent however much time squinting at different things or, I can't quite see. When you put that new pair of contacts in, it's like, oh, this is the world that I've been missing, right? And it hadn't changed. It was always there. I couldn't see it very clearly. And I want us to think about that. I want us to think about the thing, even when you wash I don't know how many of us wash our windows at our house, or when you wash the windshield of your car after being on a long road trip, and it's got the dirt and the bug stuff and everything on it, and you wash it off, and now it's almost like a brand new windshield. I can see more clearly. And there's all sorts of ways that there's all sorts of things that clog up and clutter up our physical vision, right? But there's things that clog up and clutter up and skew our perception of ourselves and of other people. And not just how we see, hairstyles and clothing and things like that, but what we see about a person, what we choose to believe about them, or what we choose to believe about ourselves, how we choose to see ourselves, and looking at our self-image. Our perception of ourselves can get cluttered. Our perception of other people can get cluttered. And here's what I mean. There's ways sometimes that other people, there's things that cause me to have a cluttered vision of myself, and sometimes the way that other people treat me, or things that other people say to me. And if people are insulting to me, or they criticize me, or they judge me, they always point out my failures. Even when I do things right, I don't get praise, I don't get recognition, I don't get validation for the successes. If people, constantly exclude me, look past me, don't spend any time with me, that starts to impact not just how I feel about them, but how I feel about myself. And why are they treating me that way? Why do they see me that way? And sometimes I have my own negative impact on myself because I'm comparing myself with other people. I see the successes that they're having. I see the neighborhood they live in. I see the stuff that they have. I see how successful they are at their job. I see how successful their kids are at their activities. I see the things that they post on social media that they got invited to, and I didn't get to be a part of that. And it may not even be anybody that's necessarily intentionally mistreating me, but I'm comparing myself to other people, and I don't feel like I'm measuring up. And I start to have this negative perception of myself. And it's not necessarily the reality, it's just how I perceive it. It's what I'm seeing. It's the lens that I'm seeing myself through. Does that make sense? And the problem is that as that cluttered perception of myself takes hold, I start to not just perceive myself differently than these people, I start to perceive myself as a failure, as insignificant, as maybe unworthy or unlikable or unacceptable. And maybe I start having some really negative feelings about myself. Maybe I start feeling a little bit more depressed. Maybe I'm negative and critical all the time. Maybe I start having feelings of hurting myself because my perception has become cluttered. And we see this, we see this multiple times in Scripture. There's lots of different Bible characters that had a cluttered perception of themselves. And one that I thought of, that I've shared with this church family before, is one of Jesus' disciples, and his name was Peter. Before he ever became one of Jesus' disciples, he has this interaction with Jesus where he listens to him preach all day, and then he gets to experience Jesus perform this amazing supernatural miracle. And there's not necessarily details about Peter's life before he met Jesus that we get, but if you start putting some pieces together and seeing some things about him, you start recognizing that Peter probably had a pretty negative perception of himself. That there's some things in Peter's life, and some people that probably told him he's not good enough, he doesn't measure up, he's uneducated, he's unsuccessful, he's immoral. He's not worth as much as maybe somebody else is. And for whatever reason, if that was the way that people treated him or what he just saw in himself, that took hold of Peter. And so when he sees this supernatural miracle of Jesus, only God can empower somebody to do something like that. I don't have the ability to do that, so I must not have the relationship with God that this guy does. And he is much more acceptable and much more popular and much more worthy of the attention that he's getting than I ever would be. And so when Peter sees this miracle, in Luke chapter 5, verse 8, it says, when he saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord." Why? Because I am a sinful man. Peter's perception of himself was that he was a sinner. Not just that he had made mistakes, that he had made some missteps here and there, that he was. When he looked at himself, he didn't like what he saw. He had a really cluttered perception of himself. And it impacted his attitude. It impacted his actions. It impacted his words. And it impacted his desire to be close to Jesus. And that can happen to a lot of us as well. And maybe there's some of us this morning going, well, I feel pretty good about myself. I mean, I'm not trying to be cocky or arrogant, but I have some confidence. I feel good about myself. I have a pretty good perception of myself. And if that's the case, that is awesome. Praise God for that. But maybe it's not the perception of myself that's cluttered. Maybe it's my perception of other people that has become cluttered. And there's things that I see in other people where maybe I only focus on their mistakes or the way that they've hurt me or the way that they've hurt somebody that I care about. Maybe they're just not as cool or as funny or as likable as I am or my circle of friends are. Maybe I have a perception of people based on their skin color, based on their nationality. Maybe I've already decided what kind of a person somebody is because of who they vote for. Maybe I have a negative perception of people because they just, whatever standard it is that I have set, they just don't measure up to it. And because of that, I talk bad about them when they're not around. I don't talk to them at all, or if I do, it's very short, and I don't spend a whole lot of time trying to build a relationship with them and connect with them. I ignore them. I exclude them from my plans. I spend time with other people and make sure not to spend time with them. If I hear about good things happening for them, I always question it. In the back of my mind, I always hope something bad happens to them, that something goes wrong that they're trying to be a part of. And most of us, I'm guessing most of us would never, we would struggle to admit that that's how we actually feel about somebody. We struggle to say that that's our attitude and those are the actions that we would take, and yet that's what our actions demonstrate. We have decided this person is not worthy of a connection with us. This person is not worthy of us spending time with for whatever reason. This person is not worthy of my forgiveness because of my perception. Jesus even addresses this as well. I told you about this verse in Luke chapter 5. If you go a few pages over to Luke chapter 18, Jesus tells a story about two guys that go to church. One of them's a Pharisee, one of them's a tax collector. The tax collectors in Jesus' day were considered just awful people, worse than just sinners. They were traitors. They were despicable. They were hated not by the Jewish people. The Jewish people were convinced that they were hated by God. And why would a tax collector even go to church in the first place? Because God doesn't want him there. That was the perception that other people had of tax collectors. Pharisees were, well, you're preachers. They were the ones that everybody looked to for their moral compass. They were ones that seemed, at least in everybody's perception, to do everything right. They even saw themselves that way. They had all the answers. They never made mistakes. If they did make a mistake, they knew how to resolve it quickly. They were the guys that people would point to and go, I want to be like him. Those are the two guys who go to church together. And Jesus, as he tells the story in Luke chapter 18, beginning in verse 9, it says, to some who are confident of their own righteousness and look down on everyone else. That's important to notice why Jesus told this story in the first place. He's talking to a group of people, and he's targeting a group of people in this story that have a cluttered perception, not of themselves, although probably of themselves too, but a cluttered perception of other people around them. That other people weren't worthy of their connection and forgiveness and love. Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people. It's, self-image is not a problem for this guy. He says, these other people, these robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. Because I even fast twice a week and I give a tenth of all I get. He looked down on people, and it wasn't, it's probably a good thing that he recognized I'm not a robber or an evildoer, adulterer. That's good. But he had a cluttered, a skewed perception of other people. These other people aren't as good as me, especially this guy. They don't measure up. And because that was his perception of the people around him, that dictated how he treated people around him. Does that make sense? Because that's what clutter can do. When I allow things to clutter my perception of myself or other people, it can become a problem. I can think of myself in a really negative way that's not completely accurate. I can think of other people in ways that aren't completely accurate. And I treat myself or I treat other people based on those perceptions.